specifically for AI policy, it is a very wide-ranging field because it affects different parts. It affects governance, compliance. It's also human rights. It is advocacy work. It is research work. So you can really come in from many different angles. And I'll also add that because I think in my conversations with people who are interested, one of the main concern is technical understanding of the technology. And I always assure them that the most important thing you need to understand is how the technology is affecting people, affecting us ourselves. So you can really come in from many different backgrounds.
Welcome to the Conversations on Applied AI podcast, where Justin Grammans and the team at Emerging Technologies North talk with experts in the fields of artificial intelligence and deep learning. In each episode, we cut through the hype and dive into how these technologies are being applied to real-world problems today. We hope that you find this episode educational and applicable to your industry and connect with us to learn more about our organization at appliedai.mn. Enjoy.
Welcome, everyone, to the Conversations on Applied AI podcast. Today, we're talking with Renbin Lee Dixon. Renbin comes to the podcast with a deep experience in public and artificial intelligence policy. She's experienced in the research and analysis of issues at the intersection of technology, socioeconomics, and politics with an international and diverse professional background in academia, public, and private sectors. She is currently a research fellow at the Center for AI and Digital Policy, where she drafts AI policy statements and comments to local and global regulatory bodies with a focus on human rights, democratic values, and the rules of law. A graduate of the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, her master's thesis, entitled AI Governance, a Comparative Analysis of China, the European Union, and the United States, was awarded an Excellence in Global Policy in 2022. She also previously has been a marketing and PR specialist with more than 15 years of professional experience in the private sector, including starting an online retail business. Thank you, Renbin, for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Justin.
All right. Well, great. I talked a little bit about sort of where you are today, being a research fellow. Curious to know about how you got into that line of work and sort of what the trajectory of your career was to get you to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I recognize that I have a rather unconventional path towards my career today. So I would go all the way back to where I'm from. I was born and raised in Malaysia. Back then I had earned my degree in communications, but since then I have worked in Copenhagen, Denmark. I've worked in Shanghai in China, and I'm currently based here in Minnesota in the US. Now, before diving into this career in AI policy, as you mentioned, I built a career in marketing and communications and working in both tech solutions and fashion industry, very unconventional. But I like to think that this varied path has sort of provided me a perspective to look at issues and problems from many different perspectives. Now, I've always had an interest in emerging technologies, and I always kept myself up to date with, the emerging new technologies that are coming out. But there was a couple of recent events that kind of prompted me to reflect on my career and kind of prompted me to change my path. So the first one was a series of Senate hearings in 2018 on Facebook that examined the company's data protection and privacy practices. So those hearings highlighted the significant impact that social media platform had on society. And it really kind of shed a light on how regulatory efforts are trying to keep up with the rapid developments of these technology. And it was really profound because when you think about it, social media has become such an integrated part of our lives, and it's influencing how we shape our ideas, how we connect with people. And then the second event is a more personal level where I read a few books by the writer, Professor Yuval Noah Harari, where he wrote about, a brief history of humankind, but also looking forward on where humanity is headed towards. And then he had a very short, concise book called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. So these series of books really highlighted to me that AI was going to be a very profound and foundational element in a lot of emerging technologies that's going to be used across different sectors and different aspects of our lives. And I realized with this technology coming and seeing how social media has affected our lives, we needed to be ahead of this development. And so that prompted me. I realized I have a lot of questions I needed to ask. I need to figure out what the questions were. So that helped me make the decision to go back to school to pursue a master's in public policy, and I decided to concentrate on AI governance. So that's kind of led me to where I am today.
Wow, that's fabulous. A lot of times guests come on and we only get a chance to talk for like literally a couple minutes before this, so I don't really know a whole lot about your background. But as you're talking, boy, you're hitting all of the notes for me. In fact, as you were speaking, you probably saw me doing some thumbs up and stuff because you've all know Harari. Like, I just absolutely love him. I've mentioned him on this podcast, and I'm assuming you've read his one that he came out with this past fall, The Nexus.
Yes, I have read that one. Yes.
And that one completely blew my mind because it really sort of talks about these social networks and that you can get in your own cocoon, I think is the word that he starts using it for, is you're basically entranced around all of this information around you. And it's very, very difficult to break out. I think I can see that overlap with regards to 2018, kind of what you're talking about first. Was that related to the election? A lot of the stuff that was coming out on Facebook that sort of sparked that?
I think, yes, that's partly what triggered the Senate hearings and also started to shine a light on how Facebook was managing data and, user data. So that was a big case. And I know that there's a separate investigation itself on Cambridge Analytica, which was a company that kind of, started the whole thing during 2016.
This technology is getting better and better. And what I remember in the book is we think if we put more information in people's hands, is they're going to get smarter and we're going to actually lead to more, I guess, common ground. Everyone's going to be able to take a look at the data and understand it, and the world will be a better place the more data that we have. And it turns out that it's not the case that we're running into right now.
No, sadly, no. And you kind of brought up another point that I have been looking a lot at the moment because I'm actually delivering some presentations around AI and national security. So actually one of the top sort of concern at the moment globally is actually information integrity. So what that encompasses is one, like in misinformation, disinformation, and because it's global, so they also encompass hate speech. So it's very interesting that we're looking at information, how there's assumption that with more information, we assume that people would be more well-informed, well-equipped to make informed decisions, creating this common experience. But unfortunately, as we've seen the past few years, that is not necessarily the case. In fact, we're seeing more very targeted and very siloed sort of messaging on these platforms. And a big threat is that AI is making this easier, not just in creating the messaging, but also the very personalized targeting of this messaging. And I think that 2016 case, and it's not just the election, it was also Brexit that happened, how Cambridge Analytica was able to use these information that they kind of harvested from Facebook users and created very, very highly personalized, targeted messages for them that look like, news article, look like average posts from average users. So this kind of creates an information ecosystem that was not the ideal state, and it was filled with these type of different threats. So information integrity is actually one of the top concern globally for leaders.
Okay. We'll definitely dive in more with regards to how we can fix this problem, because that's what you're trying to do. And I think a lot of us are just out there using this stuff, and we're not thinking about it at the level that you are, even have the influence or talking to the right policy and lawmakers. Before we get there, though, the other thing that I was thinking about was, do you think it also has something to do with, I guess, like how systems are incentivized? And I was thinking back to Facebook, like the whole point of Facebook is to make money. And the whole point of Facebook is to essentially make you continue to watch and view things. And there's an algorithm there that keeps you watching. And I remember, I don't know if it was in one of these books that we're talking about or whatever, but the whole point of Facebook is basically they will start throwing in misinformation, disinformation, because it's the hot thing to have people do that. And so I'm assuming that's a component of this thing that you're talking with as well.
It is partly related. And I wouldn't say that Facebook is doing this, but it's how their algorithms are designed. And it's not just Facebook, it's all these digital platforms, how these algorithms are designed that it is, yes, like you said, financially driven. The incentive is to keep people there, is the attention, time spent, it's ads driven. They may have different sort of business models for exactly how they're trying to keep people on your platform, but essentially, yes, it is the common goal. You know, how we talk about viral post, and then as an emerging sort of like trend is people are talking about rage bait, because that's the easiest sort of like model for keeping people responding and engaging compared to neutral post or happy post. So that's also an interesting aspect to that. And it's kind of, reflective of thinking about how human nature is as well.
Yeah, it was funny. I was listening to a podcast this weekend it's the guy that runs Y Combinator, and he was talking about, in some ways, hacking the YouTube algorithm. So they put out a bunch of content, but they found that when they actually put out the title of their content on YouTube, like the thumbnails, if they show people's faces and some sort of an active movement, like interesting stuff, then they get more views out of it, or, YouTube pushes it harder. They obviously want to use more controversial wording, right, with regards to the titles. And it's funny, every social network seems to have its own little way of doing this, and everyone's trying to game this system. But then it just comes back to we're sort of driven by all of this morass of data that's just sort of showing up in our face. And we don't have much control over that.
Control is a good word. That is something that we're trying, at least in the policy realm, of trying to push for more control.
So how does this work? I'm fascinated in terms of what is a day in the life for you?
So full disclaimer, I am working remotely most of the time. So a lot of policy work is happening in California and in DC for obvious reasons. So a lot of my work time is spent working remotely. Now, it really depends on the type of projects or tasks that I'm dealing with. There is a lot of drafting policy recommendations for government and multilateral organizations. So that would involve reading and going through a lot of emerging regulatory framework or guidance and analyzing these frameworks in order to develop sort of concrete policy recommendations for these type of groups. And then previously in my work with the Center for Security and Emerging Technology, where I was examining AI harms, risk, and issue, that involved a lot of research into existing frameworks for documenting harms and incidents in general from other industry to sort of propose and devise a new incident reporting framework. So I want to say my specific position, it involves reading a ton of, and it's not necessarily books. I would love to have more time to read books, but it's a lot of research paper, journal articles, and emerging frameworks. So some people might consider it dry, but it can be exciting if you see what they're actually developing and what is emerging.
Gotcha. That's more on the government side, is that right? So I had somebody on the podcast maybe a year or so ago from NIST, and she was talking about the NIST AI risk management frameworks and stuff like that. Are you taking a look at a lot of that same stuff?
Yes. So I definitely read a lot through that NIST AI, I call it RMF, a risk management framework. It is still actually one of the gold standard that we currently have in the US. It is by far the most comprehensive sort of framework that we have in the US to look at AI risks. So that type of documents, for example, it's a good indication.
Yeah. And so then do you work with industry, so like Google and Microsoft and all these companies, to sort of tell them how they should be following these policies?
A lot of time, my work is focused on statements and recommendations targeting towards governments and multilateral organizations like United Nations, the OECD, so not directly to companies. So it's more looking at governments' use of AI and how governments are going to regulate AI, which will in turn, it will involve companies' use, yes.
Yeah, interesting. So you did a whole thesis on this with regards to the United States and Europe and China, right?
Yes, that was back in 2020 when things were still, starting to happen in the AI governance field. Yeah, and lots have changed since. I always say AI timeline is very much like dog years. Like 1 year is almost like 7 years worth of effort.
Absolutely. No, it's insane. It's insane how fast it goes, for sure. Mm-hmm. So do you interface with these other countries, or are you focused mainly on the United States?
It is very much global. In fact, so I am currently working with the Center for AI and Digital Policy, and they have presence globally. So many countries. I think the last report had contribution from over 100 different contributors across the world. So it is very much global, and we have groups dedicated specifically to United Nations statements. There's also a group for Europe as well, the European Commission. So it is very much global. I wouldn't say it's just narrowly focused on the US per se.
I mean, are you seeing any one country doing it better than others, or?
I wouldn't exactly use the word better. It's different. So, for example, the EU has, I think last year, released the world's first comprehensive AI regulation known as the EU AI Act. So they have, covering across looking at AI based on a risk approach. So they are regulating AI based on high risk AI to low risk to minimal risk. And so their regulatory approach is proportion to those level. And then they also have one category that's prohibited practices, for example. And then China has been actually releasing a lot of rules for AI, for like generative AI, for algorithms, and they're starting also as well deep fakes. And I think they're starting to look more specifically on applications and how AI has been used. So they're also pretty fast in coming up with rules. And then compared to the US is adopting a more sort of voluntary, like self-regulatory approach. There isn't really a federal or comprehensive rule yet. That's why I mentioned the NIST AI risk management framework. It is a voluntary framework. It's not obligatory. So that's the most comprehensive, but that is where we stand at the moment. There are a lot of states coming up with their own legislations, however. But what we're seeing with that type of effort, while it's commendable, it is going to create a very patchwork, sort of fragmented type of regulatory regime.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't see how it can, regulate AI within the borders of Minnesota. It's just this technology is just spreading everywhere. It reminds me kind of, I think, of the internet, right? I mean, I graduated college in 1996, actually, and got a job working on the internet and building stuff. And, at the time, I was just in my 20s and just having a lot of fun with technology and sort of seeing how the internet is completely changing. And I feel like, again, this is just my memory, it was kind of like the Wild Wild West. Like, people could just stand up a server and could just start putting stuff out there, and everyone was just sort of trying to figure out how they could build their own e-commerce systems and storing credit cards their own way. I mean, it was just like, it was completely, let's just do this stuff. It feels like AI is kind of going, at least in the United States, is going through that sort of phase right now.
I wouldn't exactly use wild.
Okay.
Describe it's not as wild as that, but yes, it is definitely moving fast. And there's, especially now with the new administration, there's a lot of focus on innovating and advancing AI. But I think a lot of people would also emphasize that there are still existing rules in place that can protect citizens and consumers from the harms of AI. Now, the challenge that we see is that because of the nature of AI and its capability, it is so widespread and wide-ranging. It's hard to have one specific regulatory agency that is able to cover all of it. Like oftentimes we would see the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, doing most of the investigation into these big tech companies, but even their reach is also limited to what, is within their scope.
Is there anything, I mean, there's a lot of cost cutting going on in government like right now. I mean, is that a concern that we just won't have the power, I guess, the manpower and womanpower to be able to sort of regulate all of this work?
The short answer is probably yes. But the thing is, even before these cost-cutting initiative, there isn't even a dedicated sort of agency that's overlooking AI specifically. Yeah. So, further removing personnel from these regulatory agency, we might potentially see, less effort or urgency in investigating any potential harms. Well, we'll have to see. I mean, the FTC is pretty strapped, I would imagine.
Well, as I was thinking, my brain always goes to, well, could we use AI for this? Like, is there a way for us to, I remember Claude and Anthropic, like their whole thing was constitutional AI. Like they were trying to build these constitutional systems to follow certain rules and regulations. Like, is there any way for us to use AI to manage AI? It sounds crazy.
I don't know. That's a good question. But
okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's tough. It's like asking, can AI do almost anything? Not yet. Yeah.
Okay. Well, a couple of things. One is like, I think it's fabulous that you just decided you saw something in the world that needed to be fixed and you completely sort of focused your career around that. You made some sort of a shift, a 90-degree shift or whatever it was to sort of pivot into something that sounds like you're very, very passionate about, obviously, during this conversation. And I think it's great. I think it's fabulous. Like, how would you mentor someone else who's sort of like thinking about getting into AI or moving into this space?
Well, specifically for AI policy, it is a very wide-ranging field because it affects a lot of different parts. It affects governance. It involves compliance. It's also human rights. It is advocacy work. It is research work. So you can really come in from many different angles. One thing, and I'll also add that because I think in my conversations with people who are interested, one of the main concern is technical understanding of the technology. And I always assure them that the most important thing you need to understand is how the technology is affecting people, affecting us ourselves, right? So you can really come in from many different backgrounds. I would say start with following on, emerging news around AI policy, the type of frameworks that are emerging, what kind of gaps we are seeing, whether or not that's able to address the issues and harms that are emerging. But also, I think in general, policy classes are also very helpful in understanding. And because it is such an emerging and fast-growing field, AI governance, there are actually a lot of policy clinic out there. So, for example, the Center for AI and Digital Policy itself, they have a policy clinic twice a year, especially designed for people coming in mid-career professionals or just new graduates as well who are interested and want to learn more about this field. And they can attend these types of policy clinic just to get an introduction of what kind of career that could potentially look like, or even doesn't have to be a career. Could be someone already in your profession who wants to bring in more governance around AI in their company. So there's a lot of these types of clinics, fellowships out there that people can register and participate in.
That's great. At the end of this podcast, it'd be great for me just to get some links from you, right? I always put links in the liner notes and I can search for stuff. But if you have specific, hey, here's a link to this upcoming conference or whatever, I'll be sure to sort of put those in the show notes. Mm-hmm. I think that would be great for people to be able to follow up on that. And then, speaking of which, do you have much of an online presence? Do you like people to maybe find you on LinkedIn if they have questions? What's the best way to maybe engage with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn would be the best place to connect with me. I know some people would have X accounts. I have very intentionally not want to have an X presence. Mm-hmm. So LinkedIn would be the best way to reach me and connect with me.
That's great. That's great. I feel like we just sort of scratched the surface. We didn't go in super, super deep on a specific thing. And again, I don't know what you can share and can't share, how much you're able to within your current thing. But is there anything else that maybe we didn't really touch on that you wanted to make sure you sort of got across to people that would be listening to this podcast?
Wow, there is a lot.
On the spot.
Yeah. I was thinking about, there are a lot of challenges in the field of AI policy and governance. It's one thing developing the policy recommendations. We have several that we always say these are the must-haves when looking at developing policy framework. One is independent oversight. You must have that. Not just, saying that we do test and we do our own assessment, but if it's internal, it's hard to really know how they arrived at the results, whether or not this were truly, valid assessments. So is it very important to have independent oversight and as well as transparency? This word can mean a lot of things for many different people, but essentially when we talk about transparency is just from basic things like when I'm interacting with AI, it's important for people to know when they're interacting with AI. And if deepfakes were involved, to have some kind of acknowledgement that it is a deepfake so people are aware of it. But also in reporting a disclosure of what kind of training or data that has been used in specific models. And this would be also incredibly important because we always say transparency is the first step towards accountability, which brings me to the next topic. Accountability is also a huge challenge of assessing how do we approach accountability when it comes to AI and when harms occur or something goes wrong, right? So there are many different topics, and not just in terms of issues, but also in general, challenges in developing AI policy is we're seeing more and more effort or work from big tech's lobbying in the development of AI policy. So a lot of time we're concerned about how much of that is impacting and influencing the outcome, whether or not, regulations are being reduced because of these type of influences. And then perhaps another topic I think is interesting, especially with the current administration, is this continued kind of balance between innovation versus regulation. right? There's always a lot of discussion about whether or not to regulate and whether or not that's going to hinder innovation and advancement. And I always think that, there's a lot of good case practices out there and how certain industries that are very highly regulated, such as medtech, right? It is a very highly regulated industry. And yet, we still see medtech thriving and they're still innovating, they're still doing well. But because it is a high-risk sector, there needs to be regulation in place to address the potential harm. And I often point out that with adequate safeguard in place, these type of high-risk, high-impact application can be developed safely and then can be deployed safely as well. And I think the outcome is it will actually increase public trust, which is very important for adoption, because if the public trust is not there, it's going to reduce, the rate of adoption if people are not able to trust the system that are being used.
For sure. Wow. So independent oversight, we talked a little bit about transparency and accountability. So those sound like sort of like the big terms that you need to make sure when you're drafting a policy, you make sure that you check all those boxes. And a lot of that stuff then flows into trust. I was thinking about the transparency part. I mean, speech to text and text to speech has just gotten so good these days that I truly believe that the next time you pick up the phone and call somebody, and I'm talking about more on the business side, like I call my bank, for example, right? Like, at some point it's not going to be a human anymore, but it's going to sound like it's a human. Are you saying around sort of that transparency, like the bank should basically say you're interacting with an AI now? Like it should actually let me know about that, do you think?
Well, I could put it back to you in a way. What do you think you would like to know if you're interacting with an AI? Good
question. As an end user, I probably don't care, but I think I might be of a different generation, maybe, and different comfortability, I guess, with what's happening around it. I know other people that I know would absolutely not like that. They would feel like they're being duped in some ways. But again, I guess that's what the policy statement is. Then it comes back down to, I guess, trust. But, for something like that, I guess, how do you put together a policy for that? Or is it these things where these policies can be a little bit lax?
It really depends on application and use cases, I would say. So a lot of time when we look at policy and a lot of these regulation, we want to address the high impact applications essentially, right? So for lower or minimal risk, such as, chatbots and these, potentially what we look at as, and this is, I'm borrowing from the EU AI Act, is obligatory or transparency where they actually let people know. So there's a lot of restrictions, but just in general, there are transparency obligations. So we're more concerned about high impact applications. What I mean by that are uses of AI in safety situations. So they involve safety or they have a certain impact on rights. So whether that's fundamental rights, civil liberties, or human rights, right? So these are what we consider high impact use cases. And that's where we're focusing the majority of our policy effort on.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories about, I forgot what book I was reading, but yeah, it was like there was this AI, this large language model that was trained based on criminal data, right? And they were using this AI to decide if people should serve time or not. And it was very, very biased at the end of the day. It's those types of situations you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, that particular case, I think there are quite a few of them, but there were some major ones that were highlighted in the news a few years ago. And the problem is that with these data, because they are inherently biased already and then being used to train these systems. Now, you would question why were these not checked before they were implemented? And that's what we talk about independent oversight. That before these kind of high impact applications are deployed, that there should be some kind of independent oversight, assessing whether or not this is going to be the level of accuracy, how much of an impact it's going to have. So these type of mechanisms need to be in place before they are deployed.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where we still need humans in the loop, I guess, in a lot of these cases. You can't just let the AI go on.
Yeah. I think human in the loop is, for now, for these kind of high impact cases, is the way to go. It should not be removed yet.
And the question is, if ever. I don't know.
Well,
I guess we'll see.
Right now, I don't think so.
I would agree for sure on that. Well, Renbin, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I had a lot of fun and look forward to keeping in touch and maybe having you at a future Applied AI event. I think this is fascinating conversation. And as I say, we always have these meetups and we always have these conferences and stuff. So next time you're in the Twin Cities, I'd love to have you drop by.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me, Justin.
You've listened to another episode of the Conversations on Applied AI podcast. We hope you are eager to learn more about applying artificial intelligence and deep learning within your organization. You can visit us at appliedai.mn to keep up to date on our events and connect with our amazing community. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Justin at appliedai.mn if you are interested in participating in a future episode. Thank you for listening.